Okay, recording started. So just put the thumbs up. All right. Okay, hi everyone, and welcome to another session of Ethis X, the World Tomorrow. And today we're joined by Siddika Jaffer, someone I knew I met in Singapore a long time ago, and we've sort of kept tabs on each other online from afar, I assume. Yeah, and I'm very excited to see that she's gone on from her own startup, which did quite well, to now being a lead venture architect, right? So maybe I'll let Siddika explain to us or share with us what she's doing right now and a little bit more about your background.
Sure, thank you. Yes, so we met kind of 5 years ago when I was running Halal Dining Club, based out of Singapore. Since then, moved back to London and then sold it on. Along the way, I kind of discovered that entrepreneurs, especially early stage entrepreneurs, had quite a lot of challenges, with fundraising and kind of getting pitch right. So I started a company called Enfoundery, which is still going, and I still use that company to connect entrepreneurs to investors and so on. And about a year ago, I joined BCG Digital Ventures, which is a venture builder company that partners with corporates. And my job there is basically to create ventures from scratch, essentially with a team of designers, engineers, product managers, and so on, and then launch them out into the real world. And we do that pretty quickly. We do, we sort of go from idea to fully launched venture in about 6 to 9 months, which is incredibly fast. And as a company, we've launched over 100 ventures in the last 5 years.
Oh, wow. So starting from idea stage, pure idea stage, your own idea, and then pitching it to a corporate to take it up in a sense? Or does it work the other way around? Like the corporate has an idea, they don't know what to do, then they come to you?
So it can work in a number of different ways. Sometimes the corporates come to us and kind of go, look, we're being disrupted by startups, or we have a challenge, or we have ideas for opportunities but don't really quite know how to take them to market. So you can kind of have different start points. And then what will come out of it is, we will do a lot of validation work. We'll do early testing to see if there really is a market there, and kind of go through the whole exercise that you normally would as an entrepreneur. Is there a problem to be solved? Is the market big enough? What are the solutions that are out there? And if we find that there aren't, good enough solutions in the market that, the corporate can simply go and partner with or invest in, then we will basically build a venture and launch it. Yeah.
All right. So one way to look at it, I mean, forgive me for saying this, but you're actually, fighting against the startups, isn't it so?
To some extent. I mean, in a way, it's kind of like if there is already a good startup out there, we have a phase called build, buy, or partner. And in that phase, if there is already a startup that's good enough in that space, then we will connect them to the corporate. And if we think that there's, opportunities that aren't being addressed, then that's the gap that we go in and filter. So not necessarily, sort of the enemy.
No, sure. I just wanted to put it out there so that you can respond.
Totally.
Yeah. So yeah, you do work with startups, or if there is no clear solution that fulfills the needs of the client, then you will create a startup with them or for them.
Exactly. Yeah.
Brilliant. That's very interesting. But before we go to that, before we go deeper into that, and I think it's really very interesting, both Enfoundery as well as BCG Ventures. Maybe we can take a step back into time and talk about the Halal Dining Club for a while. So that business did do quite well, and you did well for yourself, and I think it reached a certain scale and a certain level of success. Can you share a little bit about your experience setting up something in the halal space in Singapore, in a country like Singapore, and then where that brought you, and on hindsight, maybe you can share also, what are a few things you may have done different, or you would do the same all over again if you had the chance?
Yeah, no, totally. I mean, I think when I started Halal Dining Club, there was kind of a little bit of a movement going on where halal was increasingly on the map. And certainly in Singapore, there was a couple of things going on. There was kind of the focus on entrepreneurship and starting, helping build the ecosystem to support startups. And at the same time, the whole halal economy was being talked about in reports in terms of how big it was going to get. And Singapore, I think, was trying to be part of that movement as well. So I think timing-wise, it was great timing, and also the fact that everybody had mobile devices and so on. So opportunities-wise or environment-wise, I think it was a good time to set up Halal Dining Club. I think the challenges were that, at that time, the investment space was still a little bit in its infancy. There weren't kind of funds that were dedicated to the halal economy. Investors were still a little bit unsure because there weren't precedents. There weren't companies that had done really well. And that kind of created this sort of momentum of, that's the space to invest in. So those are some of the challenges that we faced. And actually, when I moved to London, I continued to find that the same challenges existed, where the investment community would say things like, why don't you go to the Middle East? There must be investors in the Middle East that are willing to invest in this space. And yeah, but I think, part of that journey was created the impetus for me to start Enfoundery, to kind of say, let's shine the light on ethnic minority founders and female founders who are tackling spaces that people don't really understand, that are still in their infancy. So what would I do differently? I think, one of the things, so in my approach was very much collaborative, as you know, right, which was to kind of speak to all the entrepreneurs that were in the space, even competitors, and sort of say, how can we partner together? And I think, whilst I still try to do that on an individual level, I think I would have pushed a little bit harder on that, kind of finding key influencers or investors to bring a group of people together to almost kind of create a coalition, rather than small startups with their small kind of individual means trying to, push and make it big. And I think if we'd done that, we probably would have got much more scale much quicker.
All right. So this issue that you brought up, I think it's a very big pain point for the halal technology startup space. Even Ethis, we along the way, we've been around for a long time. People know who we are, but to get investors, or to get the right investors, especially, it's not easy. Yeah. Do you see anything significant progressing in that area so far? I mean, especially since you've had Enfoundery, you engage with potential investors, and now as a venture builder as well. Has something changed, or is it still the same problems?
Alhamdulillah, I think things are changing, and I think it is down to, it's like your responsibility and my responsibility as sort of startup founders in that space, to kind of build those connections with investors and connect other entrepreneurs that we know to investors that we think are interested in the space. So I remember going to pitch to Hambro Perks, which is a VC based in London, for Halal Dining Club. And at the time they were like, not quite sure, and then they sort of weren't looking at that space. And then last year, we actually had the first event focusing purely on the Islamic economy. And that makes Hambro Perks the first VC in the UK to actually ever have an event focused on the Islamic economy. And I was really proud of that moment and being able to bring other startups and put them in front of Hambro, who then are now sort of very clearly sort of looking at the Islamic economy space as something that they want to invest in. In fact, they actually invested in Ms as well, which is another startup that's doing pretty well in the space. So, I think things are changing, but it takes time, right? So, yeah.
Right. Touching on that, do you think there's, based on in your experience and your circles, so what you mentioned just now is a traditional or conventional VC going into the Islamic space. Mm-hmm. Do you see that as the future or the way forward potentially, or how about Islamic finance itself? Islamic venture funds available, Islamic angel investor clubs from the Islamic world? Are there investors from there, or it's more of general VCs who understand the space?
I actually am working with two different groups of angel investors who are actively looking at the space. However, they're looking at it more from the space of backing sort of Muslim investors who they know will kind of create ventures that are ethical, but not necessarily ventures that are necessarily targeting the Muslim space. They could be, ventures that are targeting the broader world. They just happen to be run ethically. And that's the angle. And I think whichever angle you're going at it from, right, whether it's a venture that is run even by a non-Muslim that's targeting the Islamic economy, or indeed the other way, a Muslim entrepreneur targeting the broader world, just doing things in a sort of permissible way. I think both of those things are good. And I'm, proud to be sort of involved in both of those movements. Yeah.
All right, thank you for sharing that. Yeah, I mean, it's great to know the angel investors are coming on board. And at the end of the day, it's about doing good things, right? Whether it's a Muslim founder or not a Muslim founder, as long as, especially for practicing Muslims, as long as it's halal, then it should not be a problem. Yeah.
Exactly.
Where what I was getting at is more of the Islamic finance industry per se, because I engage a lot with the Islamic finance industry, and there's a lot of talk, but I don't see much funds being allocated, to ventures. It's all huge private equity or banking. So hopefully over time there will be more interest. The last few months I actually went to the Middle East to meet potential angel investors and family groups, and there is definitely an interest, but it's still more of curiosity. It's
Right.
not really, it's not at the stage where they're ready to invest yet. Although I have seen cases of that happening, very recently. Now with the COVID, though, things are changing, right? So maybe we can go a little bit into this COVID situation now, and talk about technology companies or startups in general, whether it's VC backed or corporate backed or just a fresh new startup emerging from ground up. Um, yeah, uh, there has been a crunch supposedly in terms of funding. There's a significant drop in funding. There's some reports coming out.
Yeah.
So is it a bad time to be a startup founder today at this in this period, this crisis period? What do you think?
So, the sort of mandate that out of every crisis is an opportunity, I think holds true, right? So I think startups could be successful, but they just have to happen to be, in the right category. So, for example, we're seeing a lot of rise in e-commerce. I think startups are pivoting and sort of changing their business models to take advantage of things like remote working and so on. So if they're naturally in the space, this is actually an opportunity for them to do really, really well, right? And in fact, I was talking to an investor last week. They were saying that, one of their portfolio companies was kind of saying, okay, this is our moment, and we either bet everything we have, like bet the house effectively, on this opportunity right now, because there's never going to be a better time. And yet it's high risk. They could end up losing a lot of money, running out of all their cash. But at the same time, the market conditions appear to be right. So I really think it depends on the nature of your startup. I would say, however, I have been telling startups that are coming to me that are sort of just at idea stage, that have no traction, that it's going to be very, very difficult to raise any kind of funding at this time. So yeah, you kind of have to bootstrap your way through it right now if you can.
All right. Yes. Thank you for that. I think fresh new ideas with no clear path to sustainability, or no revenue generation at all, would be very, very difficult at this point. Yeah, unless they can show some very, very key value proposition because of this circumstance, and not only that, that they can continue after that and build up after that, because this is a temporary period, although we don't know how long it's going to be. But I have seen a few in Indonesia. I can share. There's those agriculture startups, farm to fork kind of startups that link up the supply chain from the farm all the way to the wholesaler, or even the retailer, or even to restaurants directly.
Right.
And there's been a huge boom there as well. Yeah. So which areas do you think would be booming? I mean, of course, there's the obvious ones: healthcare, communication, but anything that's unique that has emerged from this crisis that you have identified outside of the standard ones?
Well, so I think the broad ones are the ones that you've mentioned, right? Which is food and actually sort of distribution more than just food per se. I think digitization opportunities, because I work with corporates as well, I can see that there's an opportunity to kind of digitize practices, right? One of the pain points I've discovered recently is in trying to open bank accounts, for example, a lot of high street banks are still reliant on, physical presence to go in and actually set up bank accounts. And it feels like this is an opportunity for somebody to come in and kind of help evangelize that, whether that's from an internal perspective, within the bank, or another startup that can offer, KYC solutions and things like that. So that could be an area. I think mental health is another one, actually. So this is something that people don't necessarily think about immediately, but we know a lot of people are facing really troubling times, you know, not being able to attend funerals or family members who've passed away, having lost their jobs, having lost their businesses that they've invested their entire life savings to. I think these are the things that we don't kind of think about as immediate needs, but I definitely know a couple of startups that are out there trying to address that space, and I, you know, one to watch, I think.
All right, yeah, I think there are new challenges, new problems that are emerging, so there's going to be a need for new solutions as well.
Exactly.
Yeah. One of my friends posted something very interesting on LinkedIn recently, where he's a startup founder, quite a successful one in Singapore, and he was highlighting how today all companies need to think like a startup because you know the circumstance has changed and it's so fluid and it's so uncertain. So if you don't have that nimbleness or that agility of what a startup is supposed to have, no matter how big you are, you're going to be in trouble, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So
you kind of have to reinvent the business model, you know, because we just don't know how long this is going to last, right? So yeah. And, you know, I mean, I think it's obvious, right? E-commerce is going to do really, really well out of this. The retailers that already had successful operations have managed to pivot and take advantage of that. But others are really struggling because they just haven't got that capability and they're coming at it a little bit too late, which is also an opportunity for startups that are in this space to kind of grow bigger at the same time. But is this now the time where you start to see corporates investing in startups much more actively? You know, I think that could be a trend to watch.
All right. So would you encourage startups to start seriously looking at how they can work with corporates or, you know, plug into a corporate infrastructure? So they may have an interesting solution and they were trying to build it up from zero themselves, but you know they could easily try to just work with the corporate, and the corporate, if the corporate sees value, then it's a win-win for both sides.
Exactly, right?
Yeah.
You might already have the technology built, but you just maybe don't have distribution or warehousing if we're kind of thinking about e-commerce. And, you know, maybe that's the opportunity for you to kind of come together, either white labeling your platform or partnering up in a way that's really quick, right? So the technology's there, it just needs to be scaled up. I would, you know, encourage startups who have relationships with corporates or who can approach corporate VCs to start doing that.
Right. Well, in theory, it sounds all nice, but you know, we have a startup called Global Siddika, which does charity. You know, we are a charity marketplace. We have the retail front for anybody who wants to donate as a crowdfunding platform. But our main activity is actually trying to engage with Islamic banks and other corporates. And we are very happy with those who have come on board. But honestly, it's been incredibly difficult to get the large companies to understand how we work and how to work with us. You know, sometimes they don't have the urgency that we do, and they don't understand that the opportunity cost for a startup is very, very high. Opportunity cost of time, right? So what would be your tips to startups when they want to approach a large corporate? First question maybe is, do they need to know somebody inside, or you know, is the world today able to be open enough because of triggered by the COVID to talk to startups that approach them directly based on merit? That's the first question. And secondly, you know, how should they perceive these large mammoth companies? You know, it's like we're banging against the wall again and again, trying to get in when we know that we can do something good.
Yeah, I mean, speed, as you mentioned, is obviously something that can be compromised when you're trying to work with a large corporate. I think the important thing with corporates is to understand that they're driven by very different metrics, right? They kind of want to make sure that their core business is protected, and if they are going to invest any time, energy, and money in new opportunities, it's got to be something that delivers at least 10-20% of revenue return. Otherwise, there's probably a lot more they can kind of do in their core business to invest in growth. So I think just understanding the mindset of a corporate is helpful. At the same time, I think, with corporates, it's not like it's just a one-person decision that somebody's just going to be able to sign things off. They do need to kind of get approval from a number of different stakeholders. And that is the thing that takes time. So my advice would be, rather than kind of targeting sort of a shotgun kind of approach or a scattergun type of approach, a lot of corporates do have innovation arms or digital innovation arms. Some also have venturing arms. And those are the ones that you kind of know have sort of been on this education process of understanding what it's like to be lean and agile, and probably have the setup to be able to look at a number of different opportunities and apply their investment criteria. So that's probably a sensible place to start. But yeah, if you're just starting randomly without any connections, I think it's going to be a long time.
It's going to be tough, yeah?
Yeah.
You have to educate, you have to convince, and you have to go through many layers, and yeah, you'll probably end up at the same spot again.
Exactly. But having said that, as I said, I think there are certain things that are in our environment that are unprecedented, and it may be that corporates are indeed looking for solutions and willing to kind of take more risk in a way, because it's either do or die, for a lot of them.
Yeah, I understand. Yeah, very, very interesting insights, and very important, I think, for startup founders out there to take note of. Two more questions. We're out of time, sort of, but yeah, I have two last questions for you. And first question is, having been in Singapore and I assume been exposed to Malaysia, Indonesia, and the region, and now going back to the UK, I read some reports recently about how the emerging markets are less affected by the COVID and probably will grow much faster after the COVID compared to the developed countries. So do you think that the emerging markets is where the opportunity is? And is that where VCs and investors from developed countries should be looking at?
So I don't think you need to look at this kind of from a short-term perspective, right? There's probably a long play in here, and yes, nobody knows the extent of the tail of this, how long it's going to take for developed countries to kind of develop a vaccine. But I wouldn't necessarily say that developing countries are immune. I mean, the situation in Africa, for example, is still unfolding. I don't think they have good enough reporting systems and things like that. So can you really take the stats for real? Or are actually deaths occurring, but people are just not reporting them as COVID related? So for me, the jury's still out a little bit on that. I think developing markets are an opportunity generally, though, anyway, right? As people become more digital, as the population grows and sort of becomes, we have a very young population, so as their spending power increases and so on, I think that will bring in itself lots of opportunities. But the solutions that work there aren't necessarily the ones that we see are working in developed countries, right? I think they all have their individual unique needs, and that's what we need to be developing products for, those unique circumstances. So that's my view. I don't know if you see it differently.
Yeah, I mean, young, emerging, large population, a lot of market gaps. I mean, there's definitely opportunity there. But yeah, as you said, there's going to be there is some gap in terms of how things work, and what works in one country may not work in another country. The context, the localization, the dynamics, the culture, it's very, very different sometimes.
Exactly.
Right. Last question for the day. We have, I have a lot of younger, followers and viewers who are probably listening in right now. For those who are listening in, who intend to be startup founders, or even develop a career or their life in the startup area, maybe working with startup, what would be your advice to them, or maybe even broader than that? What would be your advice to young people today? The COVID maybe made the world realign a little bit, but things should go back, to some sense, to some kind of normalcy. What should they be doing now? Right? What's your advice for them?
So I really feel, quite badly for people who've just graduated, for example, who just, are faced with, particularly in markets where we know that the recession's kind of looming and where unemployment's going to be really high. I would take this as an opportunity to kind of learn, upskill yourself. I think doing something that exposes yourself with or enhances your digital skills is only going to be useful. Take the opportunity to train, take the opportunity to volunteer. There are so many initiatives that are going on right now. I think it's really important to get involved and be active and learn skills, right? Don't worry about not sort of having the money right now. If you are in a position where you are still being supported by parents or whatever, I think, take advantage of that. But I don't sit around and wait for opportunities to come to you. I think just be proactive and get out there.
All right. Thank you very much. Very enriching discussion. Truly appreciate your time speaking to us all the way across the world. And hope things go well with your ventures.
Thank you.
You mentioned, you mentioned things are moving very fast. I think 100 companies so far being funded or being grown from BCG Ventures.
Mm-hmm.
So all the best for all your initiatives.
Thank you.
Keep in touch. And,
you too. Yeah, likewise.
Yeah.